In Minnesota, when voters head to the polls in November, they will face two constitutional amendment questions, a presidential election, congressional and legislative members up for re-election and election as well, and also redistricting. Well, here to talk about this busy campaign season, we have Secretary of State Mark Ritchie. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back on your show.
Mr. Secretary of State, let's begin with redistricting. The Minnesota Senate had a booth at the State Fair, and we actually discussed redistricting. That was the focus of the booth this year, and according to our public information officer, Scotty Magnuson, most people were not aware of what district they currently are in. Have you found this to be the case as well?
You're absolutely right. The Office of Secretary of State has a tool that's used, I think, by the Senate and by the media, but it's called Poll Finder, and you put in your address, it tells you your polling place. Before this year's primary election, we had over 2 million hits in the couple days before. Now that's, for us, in front of a primary, it's a very high number. And we know that that's a signal that the media has done a good job of getting the word out that although you might have voted in the Greek church next to your house for the last 50 years, due to redistricting, you might have ended up in a brand new precinct, or your voting place might have changed. And so it's very important as you prepare to go and make sure that if you, through redistricting, are now in a new park board district or city council district or state legislative district or even congressional district, that you are up to date on where your polling place will be given your address today. Are
you anticipating people showing up to the wrong polling place come election time? And how are you coaching the judges?
It certainly happens, and I've seen the citizens get very active because, of course, this tool that you're describing, we built it so that somebody could stand and look in their smartphone and put in their address right there, or they can talk to their neighbor in line if there's somebody there and saying, hey, am I in the right place? But typically what we have is 30,000 very helpful election judges and poll workers, half Republican, half Democrat, who are always asking and saying, you know, let's make sure you're in the right place. But of course, the one way to really double check this is right there at the same place where you look up your polling place, you can double check your voter registration. Am I up to date? And if you're not, it'll help you get up to date because that's real important before an election. Yes, you can register on election day in the polling place, but doing it before. And so if you are updating your registration, you'll get a little card in the mail that will tell you for sure where that polling place is. But in all matters, going on the web or finding that source to find out where you vote and then using that to say, well, then who will be on my ballot? That's now available on the web. And then links so that you can study those various candidates. And you mentioned some of the other items. I know some cities will have school levy referendums. So there'll be lots of other things that will be important depending on where you live.
We spoke earlier this year when you were on the program on whether you believe election turnout's going to be high this year. And you thought yes, given that it is a presidential and congressional and legislative election year. So in your opinion, hard to know, there's no real formula out there, but what kind of an impact to voting numbers do you think having constitutional amendments will have?
Well, it won't have much effect because we're so high. The big thing that you'll see is the Senate race, where lots of money gets spent, and the presidential race. Those are the things that keep us in that 76 to 78%. Constitutional amendments don't really change that, you know, one way or the other. But we will remain at the top of the nation. Some years we're 5 percentage points ahead of the number 2 state, Wisconsin. Some years we're 6 percentage points, and no way to predict how all those things will work out. But that's the range that we are in. Our goal has been to say, okay, that means that 24% or 22% of us are not voting. That's roughly, we have 4 million eligible voters. We have a little bit under 3 million typically voting. Hopefully we'll have 3 million. So there's 1 million people. And what can we do to figure out ways to help those folks know where and how to vote? Sometimes a young person might feel uncomfortable if it's their first time, and so finding ways to, you know, some schools will bring in voting equipment to vote for the homecoming king or queen, or to just give young people. And then we also want people to know that it's kind of a shared responsibility. Some people fought and died for our right to vote. Some people serve in our public service or in the military. Voting is one way that we participate in keeping our democracy alive. So we're going to be working to do the things that are important to make sure people know where to vote, that they feel welcome to vote and comfortable, and also that they feel inspired to be part of this great civic tradition. Of course, Minnesota also leads the nation in things like volunteerism and charitable contribution. I mean, we're a civic-minded state. That's one of the reasons we're high. But we're also high because we have, with about a dozen other states, election day registration, and that gives us a 7 to 9 percentage points advantage as well.
And so what do you want Minnesotans to know as they head to the polls? Should they be doing a lot of prep work before they go to vote?
Absolutely.
Or can they just show up someplace and ask questions?
Well, you can show up, but the election judges aren't there to answer questions beyond the sort of mechanics. But as you mentioned, there are now ways to go online and also by phone to find out where you're going to vote, and that then can lead you to, am I registered? You want to get registered before so you don't waste time on election day, but also who are the candidates, what are those issues? St. Paul has a very important education levy that has to do with funding. That's separate. That's just for St. Paul, I believe. Statewide, you have these offices, president, Senate. You know, we have Supreme Court justices on the ballot. So getting informed and then doing your research so that you feel, and particularly on the constitutional ballot, on constitutional questions, because the Supreme Court has ruled that those questions, what's actually being proposed to go into the Constitution, cannot be on the ballot. And because there's so much controversy just about, you know, what's all being proposed and what will that cost and what might be the implication, citizens taking the time to just read, it's not that long, but to read exactly what's being proposed to go into the Constitution is a good way to feel like you are well informed. There's lots of judges in soil and water and conservation districts, lots of things that people sometimes don't feel super informed about, but there are hot links, there are ways to go and get that kind of information. But in any year like this, a presidential year where there's also a Senate race, we know there'll be high interest at the top of the ticket. That's always important. But we can use that as a way to bring especially more young people into the process. And that's what's so important about a big year election is it helps some voters become, instead of sporadic voters, to become lifelong voters. And that's how Minnesota stays high over the long run.
We're out of time, but I do have to ask, with all of these different important issues at stake, do you find there's a little more pressure to be efficient from your office?
Well, we find that the new computer systems and the new ways that we can communicate with our county, city, and township, because keep in mind, although I'm called the chief election officer, elections are run at the local level. There's 4,000 of those polling places. Everyone's looking for efficiency. About 500 townships have moved to all vote by mail because other states have said, hey, that's the most efficient way. So yes, and not just all the pressure, but of course our office has suffered something over 25% budget cuts time after time, including the night before the close of the session. There was a huge cut to our budget. So when that budget cutting is going on, you have to find ways to keep your services up. Our office primarily serves the Minnesota business community. That's 2/3 of our staff. But that other portion, which are helping our local communities run elections and run them well, we have to be more efficient and use all the new technologies that we have able to. And with the benefit of being able to be on your program and to get the word out, we partner with everyone we can to encourage voters to just be well informed. Where do I vote? When do I vote? What do I need to be prepared to make sure I can vote? And then who's on my ballot? What's on my ballot? What's going on?
Secretary of State Mark Ritchie, as always, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.